So I've discovered my favorite form of sparkling water.
Mm-hmm.
It is this Spin Drift.
Oh, yes, that was the one I was supposed to buy at Costco, but they didn't have.
They didn't have it. The only place I can get variety packs of it is Costco and Amazon. I can get like 12 packs of it, but honestly, it's my favorite. After trying nearly everyone on the market, I'm comfortable with
Nice.
Spindrift,
Cool. I
which I
look for
keep
it every
calling.
time I'm in Costco, which by the way, I have to go to Saturday morning, so I will look, and if they have some, then you can take some home.
Oh, fantastic. We'll be right in the hotel parking lot with you.
I know.
I have a board meeting.
If you guys want to come shopping at Costco.
Well, don't threaten John with a good time. Don't threaten. Oh, shockingly, he might want to. I have a board meeting from 10 to 12, so he might want to be doing something.
Oh, yes, I forgot you do have that board meeting.
Funsies. So, anyway, we'll work it out. Where's our brand? There's our brand. Here we go.
Let's be on brand.
All right.
Okay.
Welcome to November 9th, everybody, which is just doesn't feel real to say out loud.
It's fine.
But here we are at November 9th. We're going to kick off with some empathy exercises as always. Now, a little bit of insider baseball, as they say, because we did not do an empathy live last week. We are recycling quite a few of what would have been your empathy exercise last week. So these may appear slightly outdated. However, they are not in content, even if they are in time. And so we want to be able to have those discussions. And the first one we're going to start off with is one that Dr. Aaron and our beloved friend Jay have been talking about a lot. And so I'm going to let her take it over.
Please do. Yeah. So I referenced this yesterday on the very extended Instagram live empathy exercises and kind of teased that I wanted to talk a little bit more about it. Too long didn't read. It came out October 26th, the National Hockey League. Our friend Jay, poor Aaron, has heard me complain about this too much. Never too much, friend. Never too much. On the 26th of October, the NHL released a statement that they've fined the Chicago Blackhawks for inadequate procedures and mishandling of a 2010 matter. Yes, that's right. They're a little behind on the investigations at the good old NHL. A 2010 matter relating to the the conduct of the former video coach. And what was revealed through the investigation and through the NHL's fine was that the Chicago Blackhawks were made aware during the Western Conference Finals or immediately after in 2010 that Brett, their video coach at the time, Brad Aldrich, had sexually assaulted several players. Two, I believe, spoke out about it. And they had a little conflab, a little meeting of the top brass in the team, and they all decided that it would be best to not do anything about the investigation or investigating the allegations because they didn't want to disrupt the team, i.e., they didn't want to do anything that would impact their ability to win the Stanley Cup, which they went on to do that year. So there's been a huge fallout from this. We'll link a couple articles. I don't want to go too much into it, but I do want to point out in particular, and this was, again, thanks to our dear Canadian correspondent, Jay, for giving me the link to an opening kind of monologue by Tara Sloan, who works for Hometown Hockey, which I'm assuming is a Canadian hockey I don't know, program. I don't know. Jay can tell us. I don't know exactly what she does, but she's a sports broadcaster and a woman and loves hockey. So if you do anything, please watch this minute and a half where she talks about how broken the NHL's culture is, that this and many other things were allowed to happen. And what she talked about that I thought was so important was she distinguished between the leagues reacting to things and being proactive. And this was, the case of Kyle Beach and the Chicago Blackhawks was a case of reacting to what happened. But she also references their responses to, queer inclusive stuff, their responses to Black Lives Matter has all been a very, we are going to follow other people's lead instead of lead. And the NHL's current favorite hashtag is hockey is for everyone. And there's been a lot of times where they don't embody that, and it just looks like a hashtag with nothing behind it. And this was one of those instances, and it was very, very hard for hockey fans to take, both myself and Jay and hockey fans around the world. So that's the first empathy exercise. It's not the only institution with an abuse problem or that covers up instances of abuse and assault. It's a hobby horse of ours here at Abbey Research to talk about those. So we'll add the NHL to that list. None of this was surprising to me or Dr. Kristen in terms of how the league handled it, how the Chicago Blackhawks handled it. There's now been a couple of firings and resignations of some of the people who were involved in that meeting, but we will not hold our breath as we continue to advocate for actual factual change.
No. Before we move on, really briefly, Jay did Canadian Correspondent report that Hometown Hockey is a segment they do during some broadcasts to promote hockey in smaller communities.
Cool. So, thanks, friend.
Thank you for that, Jay. Now, moving on to other institutional and structural abuse. This is more historic. That museums in France should return African treasures. This comes to us from the paper of record, as it's called, the New York Times, which points out that in Paris alone, there are 70,000 pieces from sub-Saharan Africa in Parisian museums. And honestly, in just one Parisian museum. One Parisian museum has 70,000 pieces from sub-Saharan Africa.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know if you're aware. Now, this was published in 2018. It's made the rounds again recently, because even though this conversation started in 2018, no one's given anything back. And the countries are once again calling for their stuff back because they would like to promote their own culture to their own citizens. And
Crazy.
So much of this was stolen.
What an idea.
And this is particularly important when we think about the literal stolen. Like, these were stolen in like the colonial way, that like it wasn't actually stolen at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Stolen at the time is the stuff that the family who currently owns Hobby Lobby have smuggled out of Iraq for their Museum of the Bible. And that is actually stolen by literally everybody's definition but theirs. So this is a constant thing that is happening. We go on record at Abbey Research saying that we believe that people should get their stuff back. Greece should get the Elgin marbles back. It's okay. People can travel. Like, I don't need to see the Elgin marbles in London. I can go to Athens. And if I can't afford to go to either place, I have the internet. It's really fascinating. I was actually... Go ahead.
Stealing is bad.
Stealing is bad?
Yeah.
One of the things we tell children. I was thinking about this weekend, my husband and I got to go to the immersive Van Gogh exhibit that is making its way through North America right now.
Yes.
And 9 times out of 10, you cannot tell that they are digital projections. And honestly, most people will be perfectly happy seeing those digital projections. They don't need to travel. So I was like, we can just digitally project this shit. It's okay. It's safer anyway, because there's not going to be degradation of the artifacts. So, and also just plug, if you are somewhere where the Van Gogh experience is happening, go. It is it is really quite something. And I just think about how we could do immersive archaeology and like immersive museums using this incredible technology that we exist in now. So the official Abbey Research policy of museums with like foreign objects, I'm using air quotes, is give people their shit back. Give people their shit back.
Give people their shit back, man. It's really straightforward. Okay. The tennis ball, the tennis match of empathy exercises is back. Ball's back in my court. So this is an article again from the 26th of October. We had a lot of empathy exercises from that day, and then like last week kind of got lost in the wash. But this one I thought was really interesting because we talked about Japan and studied Japan in our Colonizers World Tour, and so we now like keep a weather eye out for news out of Japan. Which is often lauded in a lot of ways for its more progressive stance on things. However, lest you think they are ahead of the game in terms of gender politics and the treatment of women, not so the case. And so this article is basically talking about how, despite the fact that we have like all of these conversations about diversity and inclusion now, representation for women in Japanese politics is frighteningly low, only 9.9%, and harassment of women in political spheres is rampant. So the country's politics are, quote, immune to change, which sounds like a lot of politics.
That sounds achingly familiar.
Around the world, to be fair. So it's a fascinating article specifically into women in Japanese politics, if that is something that is your jam and you are interested in it. It's one of those things where society is changing faster than political progress, which is high everywhere. But also there are, specific gender performances and gender roles in Japan that this article takes into account and helps us understand. So it's a good empathy exercise for that very reason.
Moving into our last two, which are a little bit more celebratory, which we're very excited about, we would like to highlight the hospital in Mayo, Ireland,
whoop, whoop,
which provided this woman with a disposable hijab for her medical tests. A disposable hijab. Why it didn't occur to me before this tweet that these were needed, I don't know. But of course you would need a disposable hijab as you go for an MRI or an X-ray or an anything else. My gracious, 2 thumbs way up to the hospital in Mayo. We think this is so exciting. We actually need to send this. We have a friend who works at a hospital in Waterford. We need to send this to her to make sure that she's seen it.
We do. I know.
And get a report from her. She's an X-ray technician. So we'll have to get a report from Kira if they have disposable hijabs in Waterford.
If not, they need to call the hospital in Mayo.
If not, trust me, Kira will get on it. So it'll be very exciting. So 2 thumbs way up. Go on ya girl, as we say on that island, to the hospital in Mayo. And we hope whatever you needed your MRI for, Missy, turned out the way you needed it to turn out. So we'll put that out in the universe. And finally, back to our hockey correspondent for a happier hockey news.
Yeah, this is one of those like 2 sides of a coin. So I don't watch the local news, but it happened to be on last night, right before we were watching the national news. And they were talking about ice hockey. And I assumed they were talking about our professional team, the Pittsburgh Penguins. They were not, in fact. And I somehow missed this news report that I don't even know when the original incident was, but a young girl who plays hockey for the Mars, a high school hockey team, Mars, like Pennsylvania.
They have an actual spaceship there because I went to Asbury with somebody who grew up in Mars, and I once visited and saw the spaceship. So I will let you know they have an actual spaceship.
Amazing. Mars is like half an hour from my house. I've never been to Mars. So the bad side of this coin was that a young girl who is a goaltender for the Mars high school hockey team, during a game where they were playing Armstrong High School, was subject to a horrible series of sexist taunts and chants and phrases and hurled at her. And it, you know, as things often are these days, it went viral because it was recorded by people, so it gained national attention. And yet somehow I missed it until last night on the KDK news. But last night, the positive side of the coin was that two things happened. One, the beloved Pittsburgh Penguins, my hometown ice hockey team, invited the entire Mars hockey team to the game on Saturday night and, you know, rolled out the red carpet, gave them a box, fed them lots of junk food, showing solidarity for this remarkable young woman who has chosen not to disclose her name. I'm not saying it because I don't know it. She doesn't want to be talked about individually, and so all the news reports are not using her name. And then last night, Mars was playing a hockey game, and I believe the capacity was like 850. And there was a massive outpouring of support from across hockey communities in Western Pennsylvania. They almost sold out the entire game, which does not happen. And they were there with signs, and they were there to cheer and just go out and show her that, as I said at the beginning, hockey is for everyone. And if you can skate and you want to be a goaltender, which is crazy because who wants to have like vulcanized rubber discs shot at them? If this young lady wants to do it, more power to you. And it's a super, it just made all the warm and fuzzies for me to see that, you know, although it started with these vulgar sexist chants, the goodness in humans overpowered it in my hometown. So good luck, Mars. I hope you win all the championships.
And that actually transitions really, really well into our major topic for today, which I'll cover in summary here. We get said a lot as people are asking us questions in our workshops or we get emails and comments. You know, I'm not a very political person, or I don't really want to get caught up in the politics, or, you know, race has gotten so politicized, things as such.
Or we've got to take the politics out of hockey.
We've got to take the politics out of hockey, things along these lines. And what we agree with is that we have to take the partisanship out of these things. But we can't actually remove the politics because everything is political. And that's what we'd like to talk about today. The difference between partisanship and politics.
Yeah, it's like big P and little p, right? Like little p politics, everything is political. Big P politics and partisanship is like, you know, all of the stuff that makes the news. And I think it's one of the, like, I described it when I was scheduling this GDD, that it's like one of our least favorite phrases. Like if you would like soapbox Kristen and Aaron, please say to our faces, oh, I don't think that's political, or I don't think we should bring politics into that. Because we will be like, y'all.
We're going to be that Madeline Kahn gif from Clue, and there's just flames coming out, flames. Because it's such a cheapening of all those words.
Yeah, and because we can't, it's this myth that we can be sections of ourselves at times. And that, like, oh, I'm going to go into this space and I'm going to turn off the part of my brain that ever has any political thoughts so that I can just simply enjoy, you know, the National Football League or whatever. We can't do it. We can't shut off parts of ourselves. If we can, I mean, that's impressive, but also alarming. I would have questions and a couple of suggestions for you. But like we are political beings. We have these thoughts. They frame our political upbringings and understandings, lowercase p and uppercase p, frame how we see the world, how we make decisions, how we have opinions on other things. So how, like, please explain to me how I am supposed to turn that off when it literally is a part of my identity and how I see the world. And so that was my little soapbox. But I think that's what we're getting at, is that it's unattainable. this idea of removing politics, and it's straight up partisanship to say that in the first place.
So let's talk about what the definition of politics is. So it's one of those things that lots of different dictionaries have lots of different definitions, but and it is definitely associated with the governance of a country. Don't get us wrong. We're not saying it's not associated with power, because it definitely is. But the definition that I like, which is kind of the simple English definition, and I think really unpacks it a little bit more, is that politics is the way that people living in groups make decisions. It's about the making of agreements between people so they can live together in groups. And the study of that politics is political science or political studies or things. But that's it. Politics is the way that people living in groups make decisions. That's it. And so to remove yourself from that activity is really hard. Now, partisanship is a choice to be on one of the polarities. Mm-hmm. In the United States, it's a binary. In a lot of other places, it is not. So do I think, let's use England to remove ourselves a little bit from some examples here.
Narrative.
So there are 3 major political parties at this moment in England. In the UK, there's like 45,000, but in England, there's about 3. There's the Tories or the Conservatives. You will hear those words used interchangeably. There is the Labour Party, and there's the Social Democrats. Yep. The Social Democrats are the least powerful of that group. So really, the fight is frequently between Labour and the Tories. You'll hear the Lib Dems kind of talked about.
Yeah. And the Green Party thrown in there now and again.
Thrown in there now occasionally, yes. And every once in a while, the Spaghetti Monster Party. But politics in England is just a joy. So if we are talking about Brexit, to talk about Brexit is not partisan. To talk about Brexit, because it affects how we make decisions, is a political thing. And you can't remove that from any other conversation. Talking about Brexit has to happen in sports, in family decisions, in schooling, in food distribution, in religious holidays. You have to have that conversation. So whenever people would be talking about Brexit, they'd be like, well, I don't really want to get political. I'm like, we can't.
But we're talking about Brexit.
But we're talking about Brexit, and it affects literally the way that we live and move and have our being. But okay, now, there are specific talking points on both sides of the pro and anti-Brexit, camps. So it is a very partisan statement to say that we are doing Brexit. Brexit works. Brexit will work, because then we will get all of this money back to pour into the NHS. And the reason that is a partisan statement is that one political party, the Tories, used that as part of their argument to be pro-Brexit.
Yeah.
The argument against it that was used is that, we want Britain to be open borders for all. That very much could be a partisan statement. However, if we're having a conversation and somebody wants to express their personal partisan opinion, that really also should be allowed. So to bring it back to the United States really briefly, let's talk about something that has absolutely no controversy around it, like reproductive rights. So
I was going to say, where is she going with this?
I've been thinking about this for a while. The debate around reproductive rights is both political and partisan. Mm-hmm. Politically, as we move and have our being, this is where this really gets tricky, and we want you to understand that this is messy but also different. So it is a political narrative that we have to have over whether health insurance should cover terminative care. That's a political decision, because it is how we make decisions as a group. It tends to, with this conversation, when you introduce emotions into it, is when you start to get really partisan.
Yeah.
And when you start to understand that it is not how we make decisions, but it is that my side is always right and your side is always wrong. And it's not how we make decisions, it's how I make decisions, and you sit down and shut up. And that's partisanship. The definition of where life starts, unfortunately, for a whole host of reasons, is a political conversation, because it determines how we live and move and have our being within this country. Saying that somebody is a murderer is a partisan statement, not a political one. And I hope that differentiation makes sense. And if it doesn't, let me know in the chat. Or replay crew, let us know if it doesn't. But that's the kind of difference, is the elimination of human in the other person, or the moving away from a debate that affects all of us into a debate that shapes the world entirely in our own image.
And I was thinking about this because you and I had a conversation this morning, and we've had this conversation a lot in the last couple of weeks about what is empathy and how we define empathy. And we're, really hammering home that we have to remove the idea of emotions from our understanding of empathy, because it's really hard to be empathetic when you are emotionally connected to, invested in, reacting to a situation or another human. And I think this is the really hard part with both politics and partisanship. And I think the emotions is where you shift from politics. The involvement of emotions is where you shift from politics to partisanship in a lot of ways. And we've also spent the time talking in the last couple of weeks about having empathy around the holiday time, which is where we often sit down at tables with members of our extended family, and they can become very heated in partisan discussions, political discussions. And our advice for those holidays, for those events, for all events, is if you don't think you can remove your emotions from the topic, if you don't think you can have a political conversation as opposed to a partisan, polarized conversation, maybe don't have the conversation at that time, especially when you're dealing with people who you are in relationship with on a day and daily basis. There's a difference between getting into a political or partisan debate in an online space with someone you disagree with versus sitting next to your great aunt at Thanksgiving and telling her she's evil because she doesn't think women should have bodily autonomy. So we're making a kind of a distinction here between the, everywhere ether political spaces and the ones in your everyday life too.
And to give another explanation, because this is how it really fits in my head and how it might work for anyone who's joining us around the world. One of the things that America was founded on is this idea of religious liberty. And it's a separation of church and state, that the state does not have any play in the affairs of the church, and the church does not have any play in the affairs of the state. Now, we all know, for a lot of people and a lot of Americans, that line blurs quite a bit. However, it doesn't actually blur frequently in a violation of separation of church and state. And here, let me explain why. So this all, believe it or not, comes down to taxes. None of you should be surprised if you know anything about America. Everything kind of revolves around how we pay our taxes. But there's an amendment called the Johnson Amendment. And the Johnson Amendment, which I will protect until my dying breath, says that nobody can endorse a political candidate from the pulpit. To me, that is the separation of church and state, because you cannot actually be a Christian minister or a Jewish rabbi or a imam and not talk politics.
Right.
All of those faith systems talk about feeding and clothing and justice. My faith is incredibly political. But when I am in a leadership in a faith system, it better not be partisan, or I should lose my tax exempt status. Cough, cough, Scientology. It should, we lose. That is when it gets muddy. Yeah. That is when you lose the separation of church and state. That's when it becomes partisan instead of political. So if that helps you, we can't endorse a direct candidate, and it's a little fuzzy where some churches still allow candidates to preach from behind the pulpit, but they cannot mention they are running for anything. So because especially in local elections, there's a lot of clergy that run for office for things. So that's kind of how that works.
Raphael Warnock is an elected senator from Georgia. Who continues to preach.
There's a long history of that in like all across the country in all sorts of religious beliefs and systems and everything else. So there's a difference between the candidate and the system. So I guess that's another way to say it. Are you talking about the system or are you talking about individuals? Are you talking about the system or are you demonizing other people? So again, it somewhat goes back to emotions. But if you're ever struggling, essentially ask yourself, is this talking about a system or is this endorsing a candidate from the pulpit? And it's once you kind of boil it down, at least for me, it's not quite as hard to tell the difference between political and partisan.
And I think it's so, it's so important to categorize it that way as well, because, one of the most often partisan tools that is used is to talk about, specifically in our country, the politicization or depoliticization of Jesus.
Yeah. Oh yeah. God.
And that's
he was real political. He was executed by a state, and I have lots of thoughts on this. Yeah, he was a real political being.
He was, because he was a human person, for a while there. And then
33 whole years.
For 33 whole years. And so for me, like, that's one of the examples that really grinds my teeth. Is that one, because let's leave the politics out of Jesus, or like, oh, look at these people are politicizing the Bible or something. I'm like, what? The Bible was a series of documents, many series of documents written by humans in a time that was political, because humans are political in a very particular political context, a lot of those. And so
several political contexts.
Yes, several. Yeah.
I mean, and at the core of the Christian faith, it was about the overthrow of empire. So like, it was like anyone. Anyway, we can talk about this forever, but yeah, there's always going to be politics in faith. I mean, Islam is an incredibly political religion. It is not a partisan one. And the same with Judaism. And Hinduism is a culture and a religion and a way of life and a lot of other things. But the Abrahamic religions are defiantly political. And it's actually one of the reasons that Christians used to get killed. And it's one of the reasons that Christians get killed a lot now. Yeah. It's the things that states have done to Christians because Christianity is a threat to their state is insane.
Yeah.
Because it's because humans are political humans.
And I think the other distinction I just made in my head between politics and partisanship is not often concerned with context.
Oh, very true. Partisanship is about sound bites and winning an argument.
Partisanship is about arguing. It's about winning. It is. Yeah. And because we were talking about the context of when the Bible was written. We have a lot of debates in our country, especially about to what extent do we recognize the context that the founding documents were written in?
Oh yeah, the founding fathers context. Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, if George Washington saw what was happening now, he'd turn in his grave, and I'm like, I still think he'd be freaked out by cars. We'll start there, but like, okay.
Yeah.
Soap. Immediate access to soap would be overwhelming. So,
could you imagine explaining penicillin? And I think that's
condoms.
George could have used those. Heyo. But I think it's one of those things too, where the more we have this conversation about understanding the context, it allows us to hold things in tension and to hold things, to understand things more politically than in a partisanship way, because we talk about this all the time, especially with the founding fathers, because we are Hamilton nerds. And that, it can be a both and. We can,
it has to be, in fact.
It actually, in fact, has to be, where we can look back and say, you know what? A. Ham had some really fantastic ideas. He was also not a nice person to a lot of people and wrote some things that weren't great ideas. Like we can
Thomas
say
Jefferson can be somebody who hated slavery and still owned slaves. That's possible. Yeah. Humans contain multitudes.
Yeah. Humans can be more than one thing at a time.
Yeah. Thank God.
So, right. And so, that's the other thing that is, one of the things that I think animates us so much in this discussion is because partisanship like negates complexity.
Yeah, partisanship is almost like another thing of tolerance. It's just the angry version of tolerance in a certain argument. We're going to keep playing with that. I may disagree with it in 2 days, but right now that makes sense to me.
We're going to workshop that one.
We're going to workshop that idea, but it feels the same. It flattens people. Yeah. Instead of allowing you to make an informed choice about relationship with people. It flattens them into who you've decided they are rather than who they authentically want to show up as.
Yeah, and it dehumanizes them, which is another way of saying, flattens, but we talk about empathy being a mental practice to engage with the humanity of others. And if you see people only as and a living embodiment of an idea you disagree with, you don't see them as a human.
Here's a fun conundrum. So what if so this is what I'm thinking about right now. We have a lot of hyper partisan people at the moment we have a massive issue with conspiracy theories and QAnon in this country. Massive. Those are all, that are very easy for those of us who are not in that world to mock because they sound ridiculous to those of us who aren't in that logic stream.
Yeah.
And they are damaging to those of us who aren't in that logic stream. But I'm thinking, I am a political person who's trying not to be partisan, but I am attempting to talk to somebody who is entirely partisan because they cannot turn off the partisanship. The partisanship is their entire lens.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I more than anything, I wanted to acknowledge that that's one of the dynamics that we're working with right now.
Yeah, no, that's such a great point. Because we had this wonderful 30-minute discussion about how to talk to people when sometimes if they don't buy into the premise that you can have political discussions that aren't partisan, or they don't,
you can't engage with them on
if they literally can't see outside of a lens of partisanship, then it becomes a question of self-preservation and intention and what you're
intention.
What you're trying. So intention in terms of what you're trying to get out of the exchange.
Yeah.
What are you hoping to achieve or attain? And I would really advise people to think about that because, we often say this, that you really can't change people's behavior through shame. And partisanship is very much often motivated by shame and guilt in terms of the other person, the other side, the other opinion. And very much attached to moral judgments. And so it becomes, obviously it's murky water regardless, but you're down in the dregs trying to navigate whether you can have a productive conversation or not.
And a reminder too, that whether you can have a productive conversation is not always the same as whether or not you can have a relationship. And that it's allowed in relationships for topics to be off limits. That doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It doesn't mean that you're not loving. It doesn't mean any of those kind of things. I know that several of our friends are navigating how to, do how to do Christmas with their young kids and their parents who they believe very different things than their parents. And their parents happen to be very hyper partisan folks. And they're trying to draw that line of these are the conversations we don't have around my kids. These are the words you can't use. And if you can't respect that, then you can't see my kids. And I'm sure that the grandparents' friends would say horrible things about our friends and say that they're being really, but at the end of the day, our friends are protecting their kids.
Yeah.
And I mean, we've had that conversation, 3-4 times over the last 3-4 like holidays with people. Like, that's a consistent thing of how do we navigate this. So we wanted to acknowledge as well that this is messy. Our conversations here are always supposed to contribute to the conversation that's happening in your own soul. And like I said, we might disagree with some of the things we said in about 6 months, or 6 minutes.
We'll let you know.
We'll keep you posted. But this is one that we've been chewing on for a long time. Everybody is political, because everything within your life is part of the process of how we make decisions and exist as a people. If you are somebody who exists in a relationship with other humans, you are a political being. And we all have the choice as to whether or not we're going to be partisan. Now, let me also say really briefly, because this just came up, I have deep political beliefs, but I do not believe that in my relationships I am partisan. Or at least I try my damnedest not to be. As often as I think I could be. But I am always political.
Yeah, and I think what I would like to finish with is just the reinforcement that you're allowed to set boundaries.
Yes, let's end with that.
In relationship with humans for all measure of things, but since we're talking about politics and partisanship today, especially for that, because that's exactly what your example of these conversations we've had about intergenerational political differences and how to have family relationships with young kids and all of that kind of stuff. You're allowed to set boundaries. If you do it with, if you communicate clearly and if you do it with compassion and clear intention, we encourage you to utilize those boundaries to, especially if you're maintaining relationship with people where this distinction is challenging, and it creates stress and emotional strain on you and on this person. Set those boundaries. It's okay to not talk about everything. We can recognize each other's full humanity without dissecting every single one of their opinions and beliefs and deciding whether we agree or disagree with them.
Yes, we certainly can. And honestly, we really should. So it's hard. It's just hard. Everything's hard. Pals, it has been an honor as always to spend a little bit of time with you. If you are part of the Replay crew, hello Replay crew. We love you. Please let us know when and where you are tuning in from. We love learning where our friends are in the world. If you're listening to us on the podcast, please shoot us an email and let us know what you think about this. The email is connected to the podcast account wherever you are. No matter how you are encountering us, please subscribe, like, review, comment, send us a pigeon, do something. We would love to continue this conversation with you as much as we possibly can. We will be back next week live here on the YouTubes at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, talking about something we haven't figured out yet, but we will certainly let you know ahead of time. Watch out. Aaron will schedule it on Friday, and that's when the topic will go up. So keep your eyes peeled to learn what's going on. If you want to subscribe to our email list and get those kind of informations ahead of time, like perhaps finding out that we're going to be running a masterclass in the spring and maybe you want to be a part of that, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter in the links below. We have lots and lots of ways for you to get a hold of us. And as a way of benediction, as we do in all of our workshops and my TED Talks, may this week be full of times in which you can eliminate partisanship from your emotions and your language and embrace your identity as a political being and how that's not really that bad. We'll talk to you guys later.
Take care, everybody.